Edward Teller. He was a key figure in America's nuclear weapons program. His brilliance was undeniable. He helped turn Einstein's theories into military power and shaped the Manhattan Project's goals. But while many scientists wrestled with guilt after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Teller charted a different course. Retirement from day-to-day research didn't slow him. Instead, he became a relentless lobbyist for bigger, deadlier weapons. In the 1970s and 80s, when the nuclear arms race was spiraling, Teller was one of its loudest voices. He backed Ronald Reagan's Star Wars Missile Defense Project, an initiative that poured billions into space-based weapon systems that experts said would never work. But it was not just a waste. Teller's obsession drove fear into global politics, making the threat of annihilation even more real. Colleagues called him cold and calculating. Oppenheimer, his old associate, had warned against letting science lead to mass destruction. Teller turned on him, testifying against Oppenheimer in security hearings. It was a betrayal that left him despised by many of his peers. Teller lived long, into his late 90s, celebrated by some as a patriot. But for others, his legacy was darker. He was not just a scientist, but an architect of the nuclear age, a man who turned intellect into a weapon against the survival of humanity. Philippe Lenard. Philippe Lenard once stood among the giants of physics. A Nobel laureate in 1905, he pioneered studies on cathode rays that shaped modern atomic theory. He had the credentials of a scientific legend. But when his career slowed and younger minds like Einstein began outshining him, Lenard chose a darker path. Retirement did not bring quiet reflection. It brought radicalization. He became one of Adolf Hitler's most trusted scientific advisors. Lenard pushed Deutsche Physik, a Nazi version of science that dismissed Einstein's relativity as Jewish physics. He used his authority to drive Jewish scientists out of universities and research posts. Ideas that should have been judged on merit were now filtered through racial hatred. His science became propaganda. By the late 1930s, Lenard's name was not just attached to Nobel prestige, but to Nazi ideology. He lectured about the superiority of Aryan science while millions were being stripped of their rights, deported, and murdered. Colleagues who once admired him were forced into exile, their work destroyed. When Germany fell, Lenard's reputation collapsed. He was exposed not as a neutral scientist, but as a willing servant of fascism. The man who had unlocked atomic secrets ended his life disgraced, his discoveries overshadowed by his complicity. His story reminds us that even Nobel winners can weaponize knowledge when ego and hate outweigh truth. Fritz Haber. Fritz Haber was celebrated as a savior before history turned him into something else. In 1918, he won the Nobel Prize for developing the Haber-Bosch process, a breakthrough that pulled nitrogen from the air to create fertilizer. His discovery fed billions, ending cycles of famine across the globe. He should have been remembered as a benefactor of humanity, but retirement from his main scientific work sent him in another direction. During World War I, Haber turned the same chemistry that fed the world into a weapon of mass death. He became the father of chemical warfare. Under his leadership, German troops released chlorine gas at Ypres in 1915, causing around 5,000 to 6,000 casualties in the first attack, many dying in agonizing minutes. Haber dismissed morality. In peace, a scientist belongs to the world. In war, he belongs to his country, he said. The decision destroyed his personal life. His wife Clara, also a chemist, protested his work and later took her own life with his service pistol. Yet Haber pushed forward, convinced his legacy would be one of loyalty, not horror. Ironically, the same methods he developed for agriculture and weapons later laid the foundation for Zyklon B, the gas used in Nazi concentration camps. Haber died in 1934 before he could witness it. His name now sits uneasily in history. A man who solved hunger but unleashed poison, forever caught between hero and villain. Charles Davenport. Charles Davenport was one of the most influential American biologists of the early 20th century. He helped establish genetics as a discipline in the United States, directing the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory and training a generation of scientists. But after his academic career, Davenport's retirement years revealed a darker side. Instead of promoting discovery, he promoted control. He became the leading American voice of eugenics. Davenport believed that human society should be engineered like livestock. He pushed for compulsory sterilizations, segregation, and restrictions on immigration. His work lent a veneer of scientific legitimacy to policies that stripped people of their basic rights. By the 1930s, over 30 states in the U.S. had sterilization laws, many citing his research. Tens of thousands were sterilized without consent, most from poor, disabled, or minority backgrounds. Davenport's writings were not confined to America. German eugenicists read them closely. His ideas directly influenced Nazi racial policy. Hitler himself praised eugenic arguments in Mein Kampf. Davenport never expressed regret. Even in his later years, he stood by the belief that humanity could be improved by eliminating the unfit. When he died in 1944, many of his peers quietly distanced themselves. but the damage was already done. Davenport's case shows how science twisted by ideology can justify cruelty on a mass scale. What started as genetics research ended as a blueprint for racial oppression. Jiankui, in 2018, a relatively unknown Chinese biophysicist named He Jiankui shocked the world. He announced the birth of the first genetically edited babies. Using CRISPR technology, he claimed to have modified twin girls' DNA to resist HIV. For a moment, it sounded like science fiction had become reality. But the global reaction was horror. Jiankui had broken every ethical boundary. He conducted experiments in secret, without transparency, oversight, or regard for the children's future. Other scientists warned that his edits could introduce dangerous mutations or unknown health problems. Consent was murky. Parents were poor and vulnerable, recruited with promises of medical protection. The twins were effectively human experiments, altered for life without choice. The Chinese government swiftly condemned him. He was stripped of his university position, put on trial, and sentenced to prison. But the consequences reached beyond his own fate. His stunt damaged trust in gene editing research worldwide, setting back legitimate medical advances by years. Jiankui was released in 2022 and even launched Jiankui He Lab in Beijing later that year, claiming he still wants to help humanity. But the shadow lingers. His name is now shorthand for reckless ambition. Unlike other scientists who fell into politics or ideology, Jiankui's evil came from arrogance, the belief that his brilliance placed him above rules meant to protect people. Science's future will carry his stain for decades. Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was a rocket scientist, chemist, and one of the co-founders of what became NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Without him, modern spaceflight might have been delayed by decades. He was a brilliant mind. But brilliance alone does not prevent collapse. After leaving mainstream science, Parsons turned his attention to the occult. Retirement from structured work freed him, and he plunged into chaos. He became deeply involved in Aleister Crowley's Thelema movement, mixing rocket science with dark ritual. Parsons believed magic could be fused with technology, and he conducted ceremonies to summon spirits while still experimenting with volatile explosives. His house in Pasadena became infamous, a gathering point for artists, occultists, and wanderers. But behind the mystique, his life unraveled. He lost contracts, alienated colleagues, and fell into financial ruin. Paranoia and desperation followed. He became associated with occult rituals like the Babylon working, which fueled rumors of his attempts to create a messianic moonchild, though such claims remain debated. Friends watched him descend further, unable to separate science from fantasy. In 1952, Parsons died in a mysterious explosion in his home laboratory. Officially, it was an accident. Others whispered it was suicide, or even assassination. What is certain is that his descent from pioneer to outcast was complete. A man who once pushed humanity toward the stars ended consumed by fire, leaving behind a legacy tangled in genius and madness. Josef Mengele. Josef Mengele's name will forever be synonymous with atrocity. Trained as a physician and researcher, Mengele earned doctorates in anthropology and medicine in Germany during the 1930s. His academic path was set for a respectable scientific career. But after joining the SS, his retirement from academia turned into something monstrous. At Auschwitz, Mengele became the Angel of Death. He selected prisoners for gas chambers and performed experiments on human subjects, often children. He injected dyes into eyes to test color changes, conducted amputations without anesthesia, and tried to prove Nazi racial theories through grotesque procedures. His obsession with twins led to some of the most sadistic experiments in history. Mengele evaded capture after the war. For decades, he lived in South America under false names, sheltered by sympathizers. Survivors testified about his cruelty, but he was never brought to justice. He drowned in 1979 while swimming in Brazil. His identity confirmed only years later through DNA testing. Unlike others on this list, Mengele's evil was not subtle or indirect. It was hands-on, calculated, and merciless. He turned science into torture, research into slaughter. While some scientists erred through arrogance or ideology, Mengele represented the absolute bottom of what a scientist can become. Knowledge without humanity, precision without conscience, curiosity turned into sadism. He died free, but his name is eternal infamy. Shiro Ishii. Shiro Ishii was a Japanese microbiologist and army physician who should have been remembered as a skilled researcher. Instead, he became the architect of some of the worst war crimes in history. After his medical career began to slow, Ishii dedicated himself to military science. He rose to lead Unit 731, a secret biological warfare division of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Under his command, thousands of prisoners in Manchuria were subjected to inhuman experiments. People were deliberately infected with plague, anthrax, and cholera to study disease progression. Victims were vivisected alive without anesthesia, organs removed for observation. Frostbite experiments involved freezing limbs until flesh was destroyed, then attempting crude rewarming. His goal was not medicine, but weaponization. He wanted to turn disease itself into a tool of conquest. At the war's end, Ishii should have faced trial alongside other war criminals, but the US government, desperate for his data on biological warfare, struck a secret deal. Ishii was granted immunity in exchange for his research. While Nazi doctors like Mengele became global symbols of evil, Ishii lived quietly in Japan after the war. Never punished, never judged. He died in 1959, his crimes largely unknown to the public until decades later. His story is one of betrayal, a man who turned medicine into mass murder, and a world that allowed him to escape justice for the sake of scientific advantage. My take on this is that science has given us light, medicine, and spaceflight, but in the wrong hands it has also produced gas chambers, nuclear weapons, and human experiments. The stories of these men remind us that intelligence alone doesn't equal morality. Knowledge without conscience becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. Galileo once said, "All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered." The point is to discover them, but truth without ethics can become destruction. So the next time we celebrate a breakthrough, remember this list. The line between discovery and disaster is frighteningly thin.